Chapter 10. In this chapter, we will review the dynamics of interpersonal relationships, why we form relationships, models of relational dynamics, and communicating about relationships. I'd like to offer a tip that your quiz will cover the NAPS model in Chapter 10, Dynamics of Interpersonal Relationships. Communication and relationship maintenance is so tightly connected. We're going to recognize the various reasons why we enter relationships, describe the stages of the different stages of relationships and some of the tensions that occur, and how some of those tensions can be very healthy and some of them very destructive. And we're going to identify specific skills that will help you maintain and improve interpersonal relationships. What are some of the reasons why we form relationships? In our textbook, research has shown that we form relationships due to appearance, like when we think about perception, what we see, what attracts us, similarities, things that we're alike in, complementary, something that strengthens us if we're weak in an area, competency, the ability to have conversations that are intriguing and bring a critical thought process, proximity, the space, the time, the distance between us, and then disclosure. So appearance is important at the very beginning because it's the first thing we see, as I mentioned, perception. So it becomes less important, appearance, as the relationship progresses. Similarity is when you find those things that are like you, right? So what are the strongest determinants of that relationship? What stands out that you can connect with? I think it's a level of comfort also when we form our relationships with another person that has something that's in common with us. And they're also validating. When we have similarities, that validates us, it enables us to make accurate predictions. So there's an assumption that if people are like us or similar to us, then we're like them, and we can accurately predict. Also, similarity is the basis for more than just a romantic attraction. It's also a foundation that is very important to most friendships, platonic relationships. Complementarity, this describes the state, if you will, that each partner's characteristics satisfies the others. So we help each other, we strengthen each other, etc. Competency will help us communicate at a level that we both understand, and proximity is the distance. So when somebody lives closer or is accessible, the relationship will probably form more rapidly. Although there are individuals that are comfortable with the distance, when we think about our mediated communication and the relationships that are developed online, it could be a positive. And then disclosure, the openness or closeness, being open and sharing the depth of information. So at the beginning of our relationship or our connections, the previous slide highlighted some important points. But there's another reason why we form relationships, and we don't go out looking for a relationship because it's going to benefit us. Again, our first contact might be appearance, but we also form relationships based on this social exchange theory, which says, what is it that we have that we can exchange back and forth that's going to benefit me or benefit you? What are the outcomes? So the rewards that we're going to gain minus the cost. And again, I apologize for the background noise. Can't avoid it. I'm in Brooklyn and it's a busy corner where I'm at. So we begin to compare these levels of rewards and costs, and they help us determine whether the relationship is going to be beneficial. So we seek out people that we can honestly get rewards from. And these may not be tangible, something you feel or touch. It may just be someone that validates or understands you. Or I had a son that passed away, and so I may seek relationships with people that have had a similar experience. The reward for me is that they truly understand the depth of my challenges emotionally, whereas somebody who has not experienced that can't get there the same way that somebody has. So that's a reward for me. So something that's greater than or equal to the cost that we encounter in that relationship. So the comparison levels, so there are levels that we might consider in the behavior of the relationship. Is it acceptable? So we do some comparison standards that we have. And it's important to know what those are in your personal life. Very important part of communication. Often we can get swooped into something because we didn't develop these skills of understanding how we're developing relationships and why we're developing them. The comparison level of alternatives is the standard that compares the rewards that one receives in a current relationship with what would be expected in other situations. So I think it's important for us to understand social exchange theory and its purpose, rewards and costs. Also, competency is an important part because we like to be around people that are like us or have talents or might be more experienced in the field that we want to develop. So competency is another reason why we are forming relationships. So there are those connections, as we mentioned in the previous slide. Competency was one of those reasons why we form. Then I mentioned proximity just as a review. You either like to have the relationship with someone that is close so you can have frequent interactions, or some people prefer the distance. And then finally, I mentioned disclosure, and it's important that we share things about ourselves. Honesty, respect, trusting. That reciprocation is very satisfying. And all of those points tie back into the social exchange theory. As we look at those points in the previous slide and we look at the social exchange theory, we're going to look at what's the reward and what's the cost. As I mentioned, rewards is something that's important. And considering abusive relationships, the social exchange theory explains why people might stay in an abusive relationship. And oftentimes we don't understand how this might be something that we just can't connect with when somebody's in a situation that you know is not healthy for them, but they stay. And it's highly tied to the rewards that they believe in their mind are what they're getting. So whatever that reward is that they believe that they're getting at that time, they feel that their outcomes are better. A lot of this has to do with our own identity, our own beliefs about ourselves, right? So it's a real challenge when you see this happening. But the social exchange theory explains this because there's that connection rooted into the rewards or the belief of the rewards. And in those relationships that we consider abusive, to the person on the other side, they may not see it that way. You know, they might have been impacted by the halo effect. I don't know exactly which chapter that was, but it was within the first 3 chapters, I believe. And that is those first impressions that we get hooked on, we get tied to. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? People who seem too perfect can be off-putting. I do believe that this is influenced by our environment, our experiences, our maturity, and our culture. So some people might be attractive to someone who appears perfect or could be under the halo effect, but they may be interested in following them or connecting with them because they want to learn something from them. Some of us, I'm going to include myself, I tend to be suspicious about someone that's too perfect. Maybe that comes from my background, but I don't completely scratch them out. I'm just very cautious and I'm very slow to speak. I observe more. What about you? So I mentioned previously the social exchange theory and its influence, whether someone decides to stay in a relationship or not. So remember that the social exchange theory, and I should mention, it's based on an economical model, and that right there can tell us that there could be a reward. In marriages, oftentimes a partner will stay in that relationship even though they're unhappy because of the economic reward. So we seek out people who can give us rewards that are greater than or equal to the costs that we encounter in dealing with them. We need to be cautious in our communications about judging individuals. Each of us have our own journey and it is unique. So we've talked a little bit about why we form relationships and social exchange theory and rewards in those relationships or costs that we have to compromise with. What do you think? Is there an advantage or is it a disadvantage when we're dealing with online relationships that a person's profile should be researched? I personally think that we should be cautious, especially if you don't have a personal in-person connection. Maybe you've met through a Zoom or a chat video. But I think that personally, I think you should have access and consider all of the risks. What do you think? I mentioned that there is a quiz dedicated to this model, the model of relational dynamics, also referred to as Knapp's developmental model of relational development. We're going to spend some time here. We're going to look at all of these categories very carefully. So in this model, we have 3 main stages coming together. In the center, we have relational maintenance, and over to the right, we have coming apart. So relationships come together, they stay in a happy place, they're maintaining each other. When they're not happy anymore, they come apart. So those are your three main stages. And Knapp's model identifies 10 stages within these three stages. So the 10 stages of coming together and coming apart, and then relational maintenance that takes place. There are other models out there that are aimed at a similar idea, but for this class, we're going to focus on Knapp's model, which is aimed at keeping relationships operating smoothly and satisfactorily. So when you first meet someone over in the coming together, that's known as the initiating stage, where you just want to get to know each other. You're interested in making contact. You are maybe checking them out, see if you want to connect with them, right? So this is where some of our perception comes in. That first stage of relational development, appearance, comes in. Experimenting is the next stage where you begin to have some small talk. You begin to interact a little more and obtain information. Oh, so did you have a good day today? Why are you here? Were you invited? Were you interested in the topic, etc.? The next stage after the experimenting stage is the intensifying stage. So here you might have exchanged Instagram profiles and you're connecting through the messages. You might have even already exchanged phone numbers. So it's marked by the stage that it's a little more exciting. You're getting to know each other more. There's a sense of euphoria. It's just something new and exciting. From the experimenting stage, we go into integrating, and notice that we're moving up on the ladder to the center. Integrating is when individuals identify as a social unit. So when we look at this, we can think about a romantic relationship, but it can truly be any relationship. And you begin to share your social circles, you might share commitments, and at some point people know that you're friends or that you're a couple. So you don't have to say it, people just know based on the integrating stage that you're in. And then at the very top on the left here, moving into relational maintenance, we have bonding. And this is where there's a symbolic public gesture that the relationship exists. So the commitment might be clearly made. There can be different ways of doing this, right? So that's bonding. When I go to a party, I'm always bringing that person, etc. Now, in relational maintenance, notice that we go from integrating to bonding to differentiating and circumscribing. Those are the four top in that model that you kind of go back and forth. It doesn't mean the relationship's ending, it's just the pulls or the tensions that take place. And so you might have a bad day, and then by the evening you make up and you work it out. So differentiating occurs when partners start to reestablish themselves. So we need a little time apart from each other. I feel kind of smothered, but I don't want you to go away. Circumscribing is when you reduce the contact. You're both busy, you have a lot of things going on, you still mean a lot to each other, but you have to continue living your life and meeting all of your commitments, right? So it just kind of fluctuates back and forth. Now, if we start to move down into stagnating in the coming apart stage, so the third stage of coming apart, there can be some negative impacts on the relationship. So stagnating occurs when circumscribing When that contact continues to get larger, there's no new growth, there's no reconnecting, it's just more separation. And so stagnating can be very dangerous in a relationship. If we don't get back to circumscribing or differentiating, you're going to go to avoiding. You're going to move from stagnation to avoiding. It's going to be unpleasant. You're tolerating each other. You're having more distance between each other, which then leads to the termination stage, which is the last stage of coming apart, where the relationship ends. And the relationship can end in different ways. We've all maybe experienced that once or twice. So this is the NAPS model of relational dynamics. Very important that you learn each step and you understand how they work with each other and against the relationship. Now that we've had some exposure to NAPS model, can you think about relationships that you've been involved with or currently involved with, or have or a bystander of a relationship where you can see these stages, where you can identify, are they in differentiating, are they in bonding, what stage are they in? So when a relationship is over, it may be wise to take a break from social media connections with that person. It's not always an easy thing to do, but this is what our authors recommend. I don't know if you personally have had that experience, but it's important to monitor that and control that. So relational stage model, this model is to help you identify what coming together and coming apart is. These are conceptual opposites, and they help us understand initiating is the opposite of terminating. And the difference can be, for example, birth and death of a relationship. Experimenting is about engaging, and avoiding is about disengaging. And the euphoria part is the intensifying stage, where we can go from boredom to excitement to euphoria, boredom, or stagnating. When you're integrating, you're merging, you're coming together, you're coming apart, you're coming together. And so these are important stages for you to recognize just in your own relationships and how your communication is helping, or are you diverging? Are you separating the relationship? Oftentimes when our ego gets in the way and we have to state our point, that we know something, that we're clear on something, or we interrupt often, that can send quite a few messages. So be mindful of how you're engaging and how it's impacting a stage in a relationship. Bonding is important because it helps us connect, while differentiating acknowledges separation. Dialectical tensions. Now these occur in our relationships. When we think about the stages, we can see where we connect, where we separate, where we include or we exclude. That's part of integration, separation. Instability and change, where we can predict, we know the person well enough, or there may be some things that are new that we don't know, some things that are unique, or some things that are conventional because of our similarities. And our openness in our disclosure, our expression and privacy, how much we conceal, how much we share. So these dialectical tensions research says, can limit models or the stages, but they don't specifically show the ebb and flow of communication in every relationship, but they do exist. So dialectical tensions are conflicts that arise when two opposing incompatible forces exist simultaneously at the same time. Integration and separation embodies the conflict for connection and independence. So having some change is good because you can, connect, disconnect, but reconnect. That allows for independence. So the autonomy dialect is where we want to be close to others, but also seek to be independent. So these are internal struggles. Dialectical tensions are quite internal, but they do exist. Inclusion and seclusion is the struggle between integrating and separating. Again, these are tensions of pulling apart, coming together. The desire to reconcile when there's been something that's been broken in the relationship. So we do look at our relationships and try to come together within that relationship and have some stability. Again, a dialectical tension acknowledges the importance in the relationship and that we need to have these ebbs and flows so it can keep feelings and emotions open and avoid them from becoming stale. Predictability is the tension within a relationship where you want your partner, you want to predict what they're going to do, but you don't want to be bored either. You don't want it to be bored. So I think it's important to keep that balance. There is a tension called conventionality and uniqueness that I think is also important because it's when you try to meet others while still being true to the person that you're with. On the next slide, I think we talk a little bit more about it. I'm going to return, I can't return to the previous slide, but be sure to spend some time on these tensions, just understanding them. Try not to memorize, but understand them, why we have these ebbs and flows. So dialectical tensions are strategies that help us keep our relationships strong, and they're healthy. They're healthy because they include compromising, denial, accepting, reframing, and reaffirming. So some of these examples that I've mentioned briefly can impact all of our relationships. And I can think about my relationship with my son and some of the tensions that we have. One, because he's an adult, he's over 25, and I have to make adjustments because he is an adult. And so we're trying to balance our relationship and adjusting with the dialectical tensions and being able to balance each of those categories. This video might be interesting to you. It is the couple swap their phone and they look at each other's history. That can be very overwhelming for some people, but I think it's a good exercise, but it's part of the dialectical tension and trusting and being open. And again, the link to this slide is available on the PowerPoint file. So these are strategies for managing our dialectical tensions. We talked about, denying, alternating, accepting, reframing, and reaffirming. So the role of relational dialectics, especially openness and closeness, is what we're going to see in this short video. And so there's such a fine line when we think about privacy. How open or not should we be? It's a really tough one. At least it's a tough one for me. So when we think about our communication, maintaining and supporting our relationships, when we're communicating about relationships, content is the subject that we're discussing. Content and relational messages. So content is the subject that we're discussing about the relationship, and the relational information conveys how we feel about each other. So in relationships, messages that we share are usually expressed non-verbally or through what's known as meta communication. Those are our relational messages, which describes the messages that refer to other messages. So somebody might say something, not say it completely, but you know what they're getting to. So it's meta communication. So when in relationships, we have to work through this. This is called meta communication, and it can be very difficult in early stages of a relationship. When you haven't reached that bonding stage, you just don't know enough about the person to have successful meta communication. So in our relational maintenance, the strategies that are important are keeping things polite and upbeat, being very positive, avoid criticism. Now, I think constructive feedback is important. How we give that feedback can be positive. Talking directly about the relationship is very important. In openness, letting the other person know that he or she matters to you. How are we validating that? How are we maintaining this relationship? These are important aspects of maintaining the relationship. What are our social networks? Are we keeping the relationship involved in our social networks? Having a little separation is important also. It develops trust, but being invested in each other's individuality, spaces, other friends, and just reconnecting as a group is important. Sharing tasks, helping each other with chores or obligations. And again, social support is about helping during challenging times, providing emotional support, allowing space, whatever the resources that is necessary. It's really important that we understand these relational maintenance points in order to keep our relationships successful. Previously, I mentioned meta communication and what it looks like, and it's usually those nonverbal messages that come within a message. So meta communication is focused on the relationship success. So if I say to my partner, don't forget that we have a commitment at 10 o'clock. What I'm really telling my partner is that I want to make sure we get out of here on time. So think about when you used meta communication. Maybe you used it to calm an escalating conflict. Can you think of one? Relationships do require a lot from us. And when we think about communicating in our relationships, that takes even more work. When we are trying to work through circumstances, my goal for you is that you are always mindful. I'm not suggesting that you allow people to walk over you or take advantage of you. We must use our voice and speak up, but there's a way to do it so that we can have successful relationships. And including myself, because I wasn't so successful in the past with my communication, I might have damaged some relationships. So how do I repair damaged relationships? Well, that can be very challenging. As problems arise, whether they're an internal or external force, it can cause what's known as a relational transgression. And a transgression is when there's a violation that is either implicit or explicit that impacts the relationship. That violation could be emotional, it can be information that's shared. It could be just wanting to help out. But there is a transgression that exists. Maybe you were trying to make a point and that person took offense to it and took it. Like in my mind, I'd say, oh, really? You're just exaggerating. But to them, that's how they feel, and we need to validate other people's feelings. So through transgressions, we also have violations when we're communicating through media. And think about how that interaction has impacted the relationship positively or negatively. I just recently had a situation where I got a text and I was very confused. And it was actually, the person was not intending on sending it to me, but they were talking in reference to me, and they had their record on their text. So on the texting app or tool, and so it recorded what they said, and it sent me the message. And so I put a question mark on it, and the person responded apologizing for their transgression because they didn't realize they were being recorded on their own phone. So some of the pitfalls that we have to be careful of. So how has social media impacted your ability to be available for interactions, or too available, like in my case? So let's consider what some of these relational transgressions might look like. They can be minor or significant. They could be relational or social. They can be deliberate and unintentional, or it could be just a one-time, or it could be incremental, where you're sending messages, negative messages, in bits and pieces. So we need to consider what our transgressions are. We need to think about the strategies that we're using and how we are sending these messages. So how do we repair these? Well, we can discuss the violation. In discussing, we can offer an apology. The apology should truly be an acknowledgement of the wrongdoing and offer a repair, just a genuine expression of regret. And also, apologies should always begin with I or I'm rather than you. So always take full responsibility. And being open to forgiving transgressions is very beneficial to the relationship, but it's truly beneficial to you as an individual. When we harbor or hold those transgressions, it just makes it hard. It takes so much energy, so many nonverbal, it's just everything. It's like incredibly a negative thing, I believe. It doesn't mean that you have to keep the relationship. I have forgiven individuals that have wronged me and have decided not to keep the relationship and have been very honest about my decision. And I feel very peaceful and comforted by that. I feel like I spoke up for myself, I let things go, and I can move on. And I've also learned a lesson. If I engage with a person like that again, I will take some precautions because of my own habits or my own behaviors. Maybe I'm too accepting too soon, so I have to really be cautious about that. What are some of those things that you have to consider? And have you had any transgressions you've had to release? Those transgressions bring forgiveness. Can you think of a time when you had to forgive someone? Kind of like the example that I gave. Or if you were forgiven for a transgression, how did that make you feel? And again, mentioning forgive and forget, I forgave, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to forget. I wasn't going to be able to trust that person. So I had to just end the relationship. although I do have a family relationship where something occurred, and we discussed our transgressions and forgave each other. We didn't feel we should end the relationship because of the family connection. However, I'm very cautious. I'm very honest and open, but I'm very cautious when I'm around those individuals. So, what are your stories behind forgiveness? Think about them. Jot them down. Did this ring a bell for you? You know, in your final project, one of the things I asked you to do is to share about your aha moments. Could this chapter have been an aha moment for you? Share about it. Start preparing some notes that you can reflect on when you are ready for that finals week. We're down to the end of this chapter, and this short video, Soul Pancake, talks about the power of forgiveness and extending forgiveness. Think about watching it. Again, it's not required. You can access the link in the PowerPoint file that's in the module. But look at the different roles and the interaction that takes place. How did it impact you? This concludes the lecture on this chapter. I hope that you can recognize the various reasons why you enter into a relationship, the different stages, the dialectical tensions that help keep our relationships going or not, and the skills that you need with communication to maintain and improve your interpersonal interactions.